Hi everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the ChurchTech Q&A show. ChurchTech Q&A's live streaming is provided by churchstreaming.tv. Visit them online at trinitydigitalmedia.com/churchstreaming, where you can find links to the free monthly trial that enables you to get everything that you would get if you were to pay for the service for a month for free. So that includes video podcasting, live streaming, of course, live streaming to iOS and Android devices, even a Roku channel, all on churchstreaming.tv. And I wanted to say while I was at it that my Roku channel has been published. So if you go to the channel store and you look under the news section, or if it's later on under the religion and spirituality, I'm going to try and get that changed to technology. Although I'm all about the church and serving Jesus, I think that we can bring in a larger audience just with a more generic science and technology bent, and then maybe they'll learn a little about Jesus. Shh, I'm trying to sneak it in. Okay, so anyway, my Roku channel is available, so on the Roku channel store, go ahead and subscribe to that, and you can watch me on your big screen TV. Woohoo! Also, this show is brought to you in part by What Life Are You Waiting For? Not a hypothetical question, but the title of my pastor's new book, Pete Heiss. So if you go to trinitydigitalmedia.com/whatlifebook, you can pre-order your copy today. This is a great book. I was there for the series that spawned it, and I've heard chapters read, and I think that everyone needs to read it. So, without further ado, let's get to your questions. So, actually, real quick, I forgot to say that if you want to give me a question, if you want to just interact, head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact. And on trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, you can find the voicemail number 1-877-763-3246. That's 1-877-POD-ECHO. You can also find my email address, paul@trinitydigitalmedia.com, or my Twitter handle, which you'll see on the lower third, is Paul Allen Cliff, PaulAlanclif. And that would be a great way for you to leave your questions, or in the comments below. Either way, I'm not picky, so just go ahead and do that. So let's get started with the questions. Question number 1, coming from the Church Tech Leaders group. Gordon Miller asks, "Hey everyone, we are going to be moving our confidence monitors off of our stage to our balcony, face 50 feet from stage. Thinking about a 70-inch TV. Any preference for LED or plasma for this application? We will be using ProPresentor's stage display to do it." So there was all kinds of discussion on which is better, LCD or plasma, because when you say LED, what you're talking about is the backlight of an LCD display, as opposed to the display technology itself. There are LED monitors. They're mostly much larger because a single pixel is comprised of 3 LEDs. So your pixel is it's about dime size, if you want to picture it that way. So that's why they tend to be used for moving billboards, and also for things like IMAG at outdoor concerts. that sort of thing. So that's not what we're talking about. They're much too big for this situation. The pixels would be too big, so that wouldn't be useful at all. What we're talking about is backlit LCDs using LEDs as a light source. And the reason you use those is so that you can turn on and off certain parts of the backlight. The previous version of LCDs always had the backlight on, so you might notice on some smartphones, like when they go black, if you're in a dark room, they're not black, they're actually very, very dark blue. So I want you to definitely look for an LED version of an LCD over a plasma. Now, plasma has a better contrast ratio, granted, but the biggest concern with plasma is burn-in. And what he's using this for is not to display video, but to display lyrics on a black background. That's going to burn in really quickly. And that's going to negatively affect the contrast ratio and negatively affect the readability. So that's the only reason you would go with plasma, is for contrast ratio and readability. And having lines of text that burn in would negatively affect that. So why not skip the middleman and go directly to LCD? Just make sure it's an LED backlit LCD. Hope that helps you, Gord. Daniel Mandrick over on the ChurchTech group at Google Plus asks, I need some diagnostics help. Just last week, I discovered that 2 of our inputs on our ATEM video mixer by EchoLabs, actually technically a video switcher, anyway, have gone wonky. Never really used them, but I do know they both worked perfectly. Any input I put into one or the other ends up coming out all of one color, with only shapes and vague outlines, with variations of a couple of colors to tell me what I am seeing live in the input I'm expecting. I'll comment on with the photo on Sunday. I know this isn't much to go on, but maybe you can help me out once I get a photo to tell if this switcher is dying or if I killed it by plugging in a bad input. I'm still quite new to live video gear. Oh, and it's SDI input. So that's good to know. So the first thing that you should know is it's not very likely that you killed it with a bad input. Unless the input was hit by lightning or something like that and put in a lot more electricity than it was expecting, that's just not very likely at all. So don't guilt yourself into thinking that you caused it. You probably didn't. An SDI is a cable that it's a BNC connection, so it's pretty straightforward. So I doubt that you somehow bent a pin and that killed it or anything like that. Now, it could be what I would do. I used to do tech support for a living, so let's go through the steps. First off, I would reboot the unit. You'd be surprised how often that fixes it. Having rebooted the unit, I would swap. Let's say that its good sources are 1 and 2 and bad sources are 3 and 4. I would swap them to make sure that the bad sources work on the good inputs and the good sources don't work on the bad input. See, so if it's the input that's the problem, we would expect that it would be broken in both situations, right? So all 4 inputs are going to look good on inputs 1 and 2, and all 4 inputs are going to look bad on inputs 3 and 4, assuming that that's the case. If that is, then that leads me to think that it's the switcher. If it's not, then we've got something else going wrong. Most likely it's cabling. Cabling tends to be the point most likely to fail. So I would check that, swap out some cables, take it. There was a guy that I worked with. His favorite test was what he called the short leash test, which was take the source, take a short, known good working cable, and stick that right up against the device so that you can see everything. It's not running through walls or anything, and you know that it's good. If it's good, then you just need to work on the cabling. And most likely place for cabling to go bad is the ends. So a lot of times just re-terminating both ends solves the problem. So that's the next step that I would proceed on. Now, back to assuming that inputs 3 and 4, assuming those are the bad inputs, always fail to work. What I would do at that point is I would disconnect, label everything, but disconnect all the inputs and reboot the unit again. Now just connect inputs 3 and 4 and then the output so you can see what you're doing and see if the problem has solved itself. If it hasn't, see if you can factory default those input settings and then reset them. See if that does it. If that doesn't do it, then the next thing that I would do is write down all the settings and factory default the entire unit and repeat. See if that doesn't solve your problem. If it doesn't, then you might have a unit that's headed south, which in Daniel's case is to the US because he's from Canada. But anyway, you can kind of judge from there where the problem is, and once you know where the problem is, you can attack the problem. The information you've given us, I suspect the problem is inputs 3 and 4, but I don't know that yet. So that's probably the next thing that I would do is those steps. And by the way, those are good steps for any unit. He said this is an EchoLabs ATEM. I know that Blackmagic makes an ATEM switcher, and so I'm curious if Blackmagic bought the name or if they took over for EchoLabs or something like that. That's something that I would look into too, because their tech support might be helpful to you. Could be that this is a known issue and the solution is fairly easy. Believe it or not, electronics, when they fail, they tend to fail similar ways. So when I worked in tech support, there was one unit that was rock solid. It never failed. So when someone claimed that it failed, we always kind of knowingly did everything we could to prove to them that it hadn't failed. Likewise, there was another unit that when it would fail in a certain way. So when someone called up and said, no, it's failed in another way, we would figure out a way to prove to them that it hadn't failed. They just plugged it in wrong. And these were complex units, so it happened like that all the time. Okay, next question. Marvin Cruz from the ChurchTech discussion, ChurchTech community at Google Plus again. Not sure if it can be done here, just advise if not. Can we compile a list of bands/church who produce songs that can be used in our services and be used in online broadcast for free? I know some will say go for a license, but there are lots who are just in their first steps, like our small church, who don't have the budget yet, but already have a ministry of bringing the word on the internet. Thanks. Okay, well, it turns out Marvin's website was written by a friend of mine, so that was a fun connection. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to my worship director, because he's written a couple of the songs that we do, and see what their feeling is on it. In the meantime, a good stopgap solution is to rearrange hymns. So redo Amazing Grace and make it a little more rockin'. Or we did, when I was in high school, we did a rap version of Tell the Good News. And that was perfectly legal because the author of Tell the Good News has been dead for 1,000,000,000 years. Or 100, one of those. So either way, hymns tend to be outside of copyright. So check the hymnal before you do this, because there are some that aren't. Pass It On from the 70s, not outside of copyright. Amazing Grace is. So you need to just figure that out, because some hymnals have more up-to-date songs, and those up-to-date songs are probably still under copyright, so you wouldn't be cool with those. But one of my favorite songs, Immortal Invisible, is a rearranged version of a hymn by the same name. So you can do it, and you can do it in really, really great ways. So that is that question. Now on to David Hill, who has our last question of the day. This is about Adobe Flash Media Live Encoder, FMLE. Those of you using Adobe Flash Media Encoder to capture and audio video for live streaming, does anyone have audio sync issues? How do you deal with that issue? We capture SD video with the Blackmagic HD Extreme card in a Mac Pro. So David, the thing, I've used Adobe FMLE before without any problems whatsoever. So it's not that the software is necessarily the problem. What I would do is I would take a video source and an audio source that are linked together, say a DVD player. You said you're using SD video. Say a DVD player, and test that out. Now, you don't want to use a commercial DVD because you're testing this out over the internet, but test it on a short leash directly to the computer. When you do that, do you have sync issues? If you do have sync issues, do you always have sync issues, or do they drift over time? So does it start out great and then slowly but surely it drifts away? Or is it always out of sync? If it's always out of sync, then the next question is, which is first? So if video is first and audio is second, you can delay the audio fairly easily. Get an audio delay unit. And that could be the result of the capture card taking some processing time. So it could be that it's taking half a second to process the video, and half a second if the audio is coming in straight without processing, there you go. That's your problem. You get an audio delay unit, you fix it. Now, it also might be the case that you're pulling video into the Blackmagic card, but you're not pulling audio into the Blackmagic card. You're pulling audio in through the computer's sound card. If that's the case, that could also cause it. Now, I have seen situations where it's the opposite, where the audio is delayed versus the video. So the video gets there first, and then, like, I clap my hands, and then half a second later you hear the clap. That's something totally different. If that's the case, you probably have an audio delay unit somewhere in your signal chain that's being turned on. I've heard of this happening when people are testing with the microphone, like through the week when there's no service and everything's great. And then all of a sudden during the service, it's not. And that's because you turn on everything during the service, whereas when you're testing, you just turned on the microphone and you're done. And perhaps that was a channel that wasn't used. Let's say you have a digital board. You've got a digital board with onboard effects, and that, for whatever reason, on that channel doesn't have any effects. But on the channel your pastor's mic has, it in fact does have an effect, and that effect is delaying the audio. So that's something else for you to consider. So I don't think it's FMLE. I don't think it's your Mac Pro. I think that it's probably the capture card, probably the wiring. There might be something off board that's not working. Someone else suggested that if you are sending 44.1 audio, but the computer expects 48 kilohertz, then that could be a problem. So CD quality versus digital video quality, that could cause that problem, or vice versa, right? So if the computer's expecting 44.1 and you send 48, either way. So I would check that as well. You want both to be the same. Now, if you're not sending digital audio, just check into it. Okay? So that's all the questions for today on the Church TechCast show. You, of course, can reach me at trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, Paul at trinitydigitalmedia.com, or 1-877-763-3246, 1-877-POD-ECHO. Any of those will work for your questions for next week. And until next week, go out and change eternity.